going to tell you a little about the rights that we have in Brazil that are protected on the basis of us being female. Okay, so this means that these rights are either related to being of the female sex or to being a woman. So this means that in our laws, it's written that we have these rights that are protected on the basis of being of the female sex or being a woman. And after that, I'm going to show you a bit of the main legal achievements that transgender people have already had in Brazil, what laws, bills are still in course, and how they can harm women and girls, representing a backlash of basically 100 years of female legal activism in Brazil. Just to be clear that I just as all of you, I don't believe in transgender or transsexual, but I'm just going to use these words just to make everything easier, because it's the words that they use in the laws and they use in the processes and in the legal system. So just to be clear, we don't have as many countries in Europe and even in Latin America we don't have in Brazil a general law of gender equality or gender equity. Okay, we don't have a general law specifying that men and women are equal. We just have the constitutional right specifying that men and women are equal to the eyes of law, and that's it. For example, France has a gender equity law since the 70s, the 1970s. We don't have that. We have a Maria da Penha law that is a domestic violence law, and that's the closest that we have to a law protecting women from domestic violence, from male violence. And then we have all sorts of rights that are spread all over different rights in Brazil, different laws in Brazil, but we don't have a general law that protects women's rights on the basis of sex in Brazil. This is very important. On our constitution, because Brazil has a very big constitution, we have a differential retirement. Okay, so women can retire sooner than men. So because this is for obvious reasons, because we have domestic work, okay? And these everybody recognizes, even the president that decided this like 80 years ago recognized this. They work double as men, so they can retire sooner. This is a constitutional right. There is also the constitutional protection to women's job market by specific incentives. So there must be specific incentives to women to be on the job market, because we are historically discriminated against by people who don't want us to work, basically, or who want us to stay on the same jobs, on the same sexual roles. Basically, these two things, differential retirement and protection to women's job market. What happens when we relativize what is a woman? For example, if a man transitions, will he have a differential retirement? Will he have a protection to his job market? What happens if a man transitions when he is close to retirement? Will he be able to retire sooner? Or if a female transitions, will she be obliged? Will it be mandatory for her to retire later? We don't know. These things are being discussed. We also have the right to be searched by another woman, another policewoman, in the context of a police investigation. And this is very important, because I'm talking about these rights, but even though they are rights and they are written, they are not. This doesn't mean that that we have them in real life. I want to mention a sister that's resting in peace, Luana Barbosa. She was murdered by policemen, by police officers in 2016 in my city. She was a Black woman, a black woman, a butch lesbian that was killed by police officers because she refused to be searched because there were only policemen, and she refused to be searched. The policemen were very angry at her, and they punched her with their helmets, and police helmets, like motorcycle helmets, and she had a concussion, and she died a few days later. And the policemen, they still haven't been judged, and they still haven't been punished. And she was killed because she knew her rights, and as a black butch lesbian woman. Luana Barbosa, rest in peace. I still get emotional when I talk about her because it was in my city. We have the right to not being discriminated against when we are called for jury duty, because it's not like the United States when people are called for jury duty, when the lawyers from each part, they can have like questions to choose which people they want to compose the jury. Women can't be excluded from jury duty just because they're women. It's our right. Just as like black people can't be excluded from jury duty just because they're black. Women also have the right to a specific and separate criminal facility that is separated from men with female guards. It's also our right for very obvious reasons. And this is a right that's also being questioned, and I'll talk about it later. Regarding work, there are many dispositions about protecting women from discrimination in the work market. For example, advertising for jobs with evident sex discrimination. So you can't advertise for a job saying, we just want men, or for example, I want a woman secretary, or I want a female teacher for children, in the context of not being an incentive, you know, just for discrimination, just for the sake of discrimination. You can't refuse a job or a promotion, or you can't fire a woman just because she's a woman on the basis of sex, or on the basis of her marital status, or on the basis of pregnancy, or on the basis, you can't take sex in consideration when determining payment, professional formation, promotions, etc. When talking about political parties, we have a 30% quota of candidatures. We can easily dribble that. So for example, we call that orange candidatures because the parties, they just present a female candidature, but they don't make the advertisement for it. In paper, the quota is filled, but the women are not necessarily given the funds for making advertisement, for promoting their candidatures, etc. Also, when talking about party funds, some of the funds originated from the party funds must be applied on the creation and conservation of programs of promotion and diffusion of the political participation of women. During elections, we have the free propaganda, the free advertisement in our televisions. And these propagandas, these advertisements must promote the political participation of women, and for at least 10% of the program's time, okay? So, and this is dedicated to women. It's written specifically women. There are also many essential rights that are not necessarily related to being female and may not be written explicitly anywhere, but are intrinsically related to a democratic society that not only supports women and girls, but also helps them thrive. And I'm talking about free speech, free press, the right to inform and to be informed. These are specifically constitutional rights here in Brazil, but they are being jeopardized by trans rights. And for example, my magazine, the magazine that I'm part of, we are not even a press, we are not even an institutionalized media vehicle, but we have been under an attack that's been convoked by important like media figures, like important lesbian and left-wing feminist activist people, because we express ourselves with courage and bravery against the transgender struggle against women and girls' rights. Another right that is not protected anywhere in Brazilian law, but could be protected if we bend the laws in our favor, is the right to sexual orientation. Transgender people have tried to modify what it means to be a lesbian. So I recently have studied what is on our internet, in Brazilian internet, when we search for transphobic lesbians. These trans-identified males that consider themselves to be lesbians, so heterosexual men, they claim that they're trying to modify the word lesbian to mean a woman that likes woman, a woman that has relations with women, with other women. So not a female that has sexual and affective relationships with other females. Okay, so this guy that wrote this article for a lesbian and bisexual cis women and trans women magazine, he called lesbians genital lesbians. So and these men are saying that lesbian that don't engage in sexual relationship with trans-identified males, they are genitalists, they have fetish for vaginas, and so on. And this is an attack to the right to have sexual orientation. For example, I'm a heterosexual woman, and so this means I'm attracted to males. But I'm obviously not going to be attracted to a trans male. I don't have the right to deny, to refuse the attractions, or otherwise I'm being a bigot. Another right that's being under jeopardized by trans rights is the right to organize and to assemble without males. Okay, and males, by males, I mean like independently of how they identify. Being able not to choose not to touch or be touched by a person of the opposite sex in any given context, by most importantly, for example, in the health context. Okay, so you can choose to be being taken care of by a female doctor. Okay, the right to having spaces segregated by sex, so bathrooms, locker rooms, spaces in health facilities, hotels and hostels, shelters, campings, sports separated by sex and not gender, being able to hire female workers for specific occupations, public policy, charity actions, public contests, prizes, support groups, NGOs aimed at females not being dismissed as transphobic. So when we relativize the concept of women to mean anyone that identifies as a woman, and when we say that we only want to do actions aimed at females, and when this is dismissed as transphobic, we can't address the historical and the material discrimination faced by females. One of the most important things for me is the right to gather up demographic information about females, okay? So there are some bills that are proposing to change the way that we gather up information from sex to gender identity. And I think we've already seen some of these changes on the media, for example. When we see something like female pedophile is arrested, and then we're like, female pedophile? And then you go on the news and there's like transgender female, transgender male, and you're like, oh, I see. And then, so we have the right to know who these people are. And when you gather up information based on gender identity, this messes up the whole demographic info that we have. What rights do transgender people have in Brazil? Transgender people don't have many rights like on laws in Brazil. They have tried to get rights via courts. Okay, so on the last 4 or 5 years, they have gotten lots of decisions on their favor. For example, they have gotten the right to change their birth certificate, their names and their gender on their birth certificate without having to change, without having to do surgery, the sex surgery. This is an interesting information. Trans women can have the sex surgery in our unified health system since 2008. But trans men can have it only since 2018. So whatever. In 2018, the Supreme Court, our Supreme Court, recognized trans people's right to alter their name and their gender in their birth certificate. In 2018, the Electoral Supreme Court determined that trans women and travestis can compete to our elective positions in the elections using the 30% quota destined to females. In 2019, the Supreme Court decided outright that trans-identified males can be transferred to female prisons. And in last year, in 2019, the discrimination against homosexuals and transgender people were criminalized by the Supreme Court using the law that defines racism crimes. Now, practicing, inducing, or inciting discrimination or prejudice can be considered a felony, punishable with a 1 to 3 years prison sentence. Okay, now I ask you, what is discrimination or prejudice? I mean, it's not defined anywhere, so it depends on the lawyer's ability to define, or in the judge's ability to be banned by the lawyer who sues someone based on this. So the trans lobby has been trying to criminalize the discrimination by gender identity for years, okay? So our Congress, that is the place that makes laws in Brazil, there are two houses, the Senate and the Deputies Chamber, okay? So in the Senate, there are 2 bills trying to criminalize it. And in the Deputies Chamber, there are 6 bills, okay? So law projects, okay? There is 1 bill trying to extend the Maria da Penha law to trans women. So the domestic violence, the law that protects females against domestic violence, that is a violence largely connected with our sex, with a type of violence that is historically and largely based on domestic relations and male dominance over women based on sex. Now it can be, there is a bill trying to extend it to trans women. There is 1 bill trying to modify the national law of guidelines for education to include a determination for educational facilities to include in their internal normatives norms of appreciation of diversity, including gender diversity, internal mechanisms of consciousness raising, and combat and punishment to forms of discrimination and oppression by race, age, sexual orientation, religion, and gender identity. There is also 1 bill that is very, very problematic in my eyes because I'm very, very against criminalizing everything. There is 1 bill that creates hate and intolerance crimes, and 1 bill that's called Sexual and Gender Diversity Statute Bill, okay? And remember all those rights that I talked to you about, that I told you about, that were those rights that are not necessarily related to being female and they were not written anywhere. Well, these rights, because they were not written anywhere, they would just stop existing because these 2 bills that I told you about, they would just end them, okay? So this bill that creates hate and intolerance crimes, that is a figure that we don't have, hate and intolerance crimes. And the Sexual and Gender Diversity Statute Bill. This Sexual and Gender Diversity Statute Bill, it says that, it not only says that children, it doesn't matter how young they can be. They can start having therapy and having hormones given to them if they express feeling discomfort to their gender, whatever that means. They can have access, transgender people can have access to public spaces according to their gender identity, and it punishes any kind of discrimination and they don't say, they don't specify what discrimination means. All these laws that mention discrimination, they don't specify what discrimination means, and I think this is very, very dangerous, because anything can be discriminatory, okay? If they take literally the 1,000 texts that we have at our site at QG Feminista, they can be discriminatory, okay? Because we talk about females and we don't include males, we don't include transgender women. This is just the result of a quick research I did about federal laws, okay? If I was to search about state laws and city laws, we would be here for hours, okay? And if you would search on Eugênia's state, that is Rio de Janeiro, is the worst place to be in Brazil, because the transgender lobby just occupied everything. And there are many, many laws, including this year, under Bolsonaro's laws, that under Bolsonaro's government, they just keep producing these bills. Okay, so I just wrote it all down in English. So if you all want me to send you for you to read, I have all the numbers, I have all the links if you all want me. And sorry if I just vomited here a bunch of information for you, but this is just a large bunch of information about Brazil. It's very concerned. I'm very concerned about our situation.